The sharp rap of the gavel reverberated through the confines of Courtroom 7 in the Riverside County Courthouse, a sound that demanded attention and silenced the murmurs of those present. Judge Elena Brooks, her voice carrying the weight of authority, declared, "Sergeant David Keane, you will rise for this court." The command hung in the air, heavy with expectation, but what followed was a moment so profound it would ripple far beyond the courtroom's walls, touching the conscience of a nation and redefining what it meant to stand for justice. Courtroom 7 was a relic of a bygone era, its once polished oak paneling now dulled by years of neglect. The air was thick with the faint scent of lemon-scented, cleaner, a feeble attempt to mask the lingering odor of anxiety and desperation that clung to the space. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting stark shadows across the faces of the gathered crowd, etching worry lines deeper and highlighting the exhaustion in their eyes. The American flag, positioned beside the judge's bench, hung limply, its faded colors a silent testament to the room's faded grandeur. For those who frequented this space, attorneys, clerks, and defendants alike, it was a place where justice was meant to be served, though not always with fairness or compassion. At the defendant's table sat Sergeant David Keane, a 34-year-old veteran whose weathered face told a story of sacrifice few in the room could fully grasp. Beneath his neatly pressed khaki pants, a prosthetic leg concealed the physical toll of an improvised explosive device, IED, that had forever altered his life during his third tour in Iraq. His left hand, trembling slightly from nerve damage, rested on the arm of his military-grade wheelchair, a constant companion that seemed out of place in a courtroom, designed without accessibility in mind. The chair's wheels pressed awkwardly against the edge of the defense table, a subtle reminder of the barriers David faced daily. Before the war, David had been a beloved high school physics teacher in this very county. His classroom had been a haven for students, where he stayed late to tutor those who struggled and coached the wrestling team to a state championship. When he enlisted after the September 11th attacks, driven by a sense of duty inherited from his father, a Vietnam veteran, his students had sent him off with handmade signs and cheers. Photograph of that moment, 30 teenagers beaming with pride, still sat on his nightstand, though most of those students were now college graduates, their lives moving forward while David's had been irrevocably changed. Despite losing his leg and grappling with a traumatic brain injury, David had never let his injuries define him. Instead, he poured his energy into helping other veterans, turning his modest apartment into a hub for those navigating the complexities of the Veterans Affairs system. He assisted with paperwork, appeals, and sometimes just listened, offering the empathy of someone who understood the invisible wounds of war. Yet today, he found himself in an ironic predicament, facing contempt of court charges for missing 3 hearings related to a minor traffic violation. The violation had occurred when he swerved his hand-controlled vehicle to avoid a distracted driver, but the court's response had been to schedule hearings at a downtown courthouse that was nearly impossible for him to access. Public transportation routes had changed, leaving the nearest bus stop 8 blocks away, with no accessible path for a wheelchair user. His requests for accommodations, whether a teleconference or a transfer to a more accessible courthouse, had been met with bureaucratic indifference, each denial citing rigid procedural rules. Presiding over the case was Judge Elena Brooks, a 58-year-old jurist known for her unwavering commitment to courtroom protocol. With 2 decades on the bench, she had earned a reputation as a no-nonsense judge who valued order above all else. Her father, a career military officer, had instilled in her a rigid sense of discipline, though she rarely spoke of her upbringing on military bases. Some courthouse regulars speculated that her strict demeanor, especially toward military defendants, stemmed from a need to prove her impartiality, as if leniency might be mistaken for favoritism. Her presence loomed large in the courtroom, her black robe a symbol of authority that brooked no challenge. As the bailiff called the court to order, a palpable tension settled over the room. This was no longer just about a missed court date. It had become a referendum on how the justice system treated those who had sacrificed for their country. Case number 23-CR7842, State versus David Keane, in the matter of contempt of court. The clerk announced, her voice cutting through the silence. Judge Brooks adjusted her reading glasses and scanned the case file. Her lips pursed in disapproval. Mr. Keane, this is the 4th time this matter has come before this court. You have repeatedly failed to appear as ordered. David's court-appointed attorney Marcus Washington, a young lawyer still finding his footing 3 years out of law school, stood quickly. Your Honor, as documented in our filings, Sergeant Keane's absences were due to... David raised a hand, gently interrupting. I can speak for myself, Marcus. The attorney hesitated, then nodded and sat down, his inexperience evident, but his respect for his client clear. Your Honor, David began, his voice steady yet imbued with a quiet strength. I've submitted explanations for my absences. The bus route to this courthouse changed last year, and the nearest stop is now 8 blocks away, with no accessible path for someone in a wheelchair. I requested a teleconference or a transfer to the West Side Courthouse, which is more accessible, but those requests were denied. Judge Brooks waved a hand dismissively, her expression hardening. Mr. Keane, this court does not operate on personal convenience. The law applies equally to all, and procedures are not optional. A murmur of discontent rippled through the gallery, where an elderly man wearing a Korean War veteran's cap shook his head in disapproval. David pressed on, undeterred. With all due respect, Your Honor, I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for equal access to justice, as guaranteed by the Americans with Disabilities Act. The judge's voice sharpened as she interrupted again. Mr. Keane, this court is well aware of federal statutes. What it will not tolerate is a defendant lecturing on the law. She shuffled the papers before her, her movements brisk. The record shows you received proper notice for each hearing. Your failure to appear constitutes contempt, regardless of your reasons. Marcus rose again, his voice earnest. Your Honor, my client is a decorated combat veteran who sustained his injuries in service to this country. Surely the court can consider... Judge Brooks cut him off, her tone icy. Mr. Washington, your client's military service, while admirable, does not exempt him from the law. In fact, as someone who swore an oath to defend this nation, he should understand the importance of respecting legal authority. The courtroom fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the room. David's face remained composed, though a slight tightening of his jaw betrayed his frustration. Judge Brooks straightened her robe and fixed her gaze on him. Before I pronounce sentence, the defendant will rise and face this court. Marcus immediately protested. Your Honor, my client is physically unable to... The judge's voice cut through like a blade. The defendant will stand. This is my courtroom, Mr. Washington, and defendants show respect by standing to receive their sentence. David met the judge's gaze, his eyes steady but weary. Your Honor, I would stand if I could. I have a prosthetic leg, but due to nerve damage, I can only use it for short periods. Today is not a good day. A flicker of something, irritation, perhaps skepticism, crossed Judge Brooks's face. Mr. Keane, I see no medical expert here to confirm your limitations. What I see is a defendant attempting to manipulate this court with his condition. You will stand, or you will face additional contempt charges. A stunned silence enveloped the room. Even the court reporter paused, her fingers hovering over her stenotype machine. David glanced at Marcus, who looked helpless, then back at the judge. With a resigned nod, he gripped the arms of his wheelchair and began the arduous task of standing. His face contorted with effort as he pushed himself upward, his good leg trembling under the strain. His knuckles whitened as he clung to the defense table for support, sweat beading on his forehead despite the courtroom's chill. For a fleeting moment he stood upright, swaying slightly but defiant, his eyes locked on Judge Brooks with a dignity born of resilience. Then came the tremor, a subtle spasm that those familiar with nerve damage would recognize as a warning. It started in his damaged leg and rippled through his body. David's expression shifted from determination to alarm, then to resignation as he felt his balance falter. "I can't," he whispered, but it was too late. His prosthetic leg buckled, and he collapsed, his shoulder striking the edge of the table before he hit the floor. A collective gasp rose from the spectators as Marcus rushed to his side. "Your Honor, please," Marcus pleaded, kneeling beside his client. But it was not his words that seized the courtroom's attention. It was David, lying on the cold floor, pain etched across his face, yet still struggling to rise. "Stay down, David," Marcus urged softly. "Don't do this to yourself." "Help me up," David insisted through gritted teeth. "If the court wants me to stand, I'll stand." In the gallery, the elderly Korean War veteran suddenly stood, his voice trembling with emotion. "I'll stand for him," he declared. Beside him, a woman in a postal worker's uniform rose as well. "My son served with men like him. I'll stand too." One by one, others followed. First a few, then a dozen, then the entire room. The court clerk stood. The bailiff hesitated before joining, and even a young reporter, roused from his boredom in the back row, rose to his feet. The stenographer set aside her machine and stood, her eyes glistening. Judge Brooks remained seated, her expression shifting from anger to bewilderment as she witnessed the silent uprising unfolding before her. "Order," she demanded, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "I will have order in this court." From the floor, David looked up at the standing crowd, his confusion giving way to gratitude. With Marcus's help, he pulled himself back into his wheelchair. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "it appears I'm standing now through them." Judge Brooks stared at the room, now filled with citizens standing in defiance and solidarity. Some wept, others stood resolute, and, for the first time in her career, she seemed at a loss for words. The silence was broken by the courtroom doors swinging open. A tall woman in an army dress uniform strode in, her insignia marking her as a colonel. "Colonel Jennifer Ramirez, U.S. Army Judge Advocate General's Corps," she announced, approaching the bench. "Your Honor, I've been sent by the Department of Veterans Affairs to observe these proceedings, following complaints about the treatment of disabled veterans in this jurisdiction." Judge Brooks's face paled slightly. "Colonel, this is an active proceeding. You have no standing to—" "On the contrary," Colonel Ramirez interrupted, placing a document before the judge. "This federal order grants me observer status in any proceeding involving veterans with service-connected disabilities, and what I've witnessed here is deeply concerning." The tension in the courtroom reached a fever pitch. Judge Brooks stared at the document, then at Colonel Ramirez, whose calm authority seemed to command the room. The spectators remained standing, a silent jury bearing witness to the moment. "This court is in recess for 15 minutes, Judge Brooks declared, her gavel striking with less force than usual. "Colonel Ramirez, my chambers now." As the judge exited, David remained in his wheelchair, surrounded by Marcus and several spectators who approached to offer support. The elderly Korean War veteran, Staff Sergeant Frank Morales, extended a hand. 38th Infantry Regiment. He introduced himself. "What happened here today isn't right, son." David shook his hand, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for standing, sir. It means more than you know." "We take care of our own," Frank replied simply. Behind the heavy oak door of Judge Brooks's chambers, a heated exchange unfolded. Though muffled, her raised voice carried through the walls. "This is judicial interference. You cannot undermine my authority in my own courtroom." Colonel Ramirez's response was too soft to hear, but it prompted a long silence, followed by the rustle of papers. Inside, Judge Brooks sat at her desk, staring at photographs Colonel Ramirez had presented. David in Iraq, standing tall with his unit. David in a military hospital, his body broken but his spirit unbroken. David receiving the Purple Heart, seated in the same wheelchair he used today. He saved 2 men from a burning Humvee after the IED that took his leg, Colonel Ramirez explained. His nerve damage is permanent. Some days he can use his prosthetic briefly. Others, the pain is too severe. Judge Brooks picked up a photo, her fingers trembling. My father was career military, she said quietly, almost to herself. He never tolerated weakness. He saw it as a failure. Her voice faltered and she set the photo down. I may have misjudged this situation. There's a difference between weakness and disability, Colonel Ramirez said gently. What happened today wasn't disrespect. It was a man being asked to do the impossible. Judge Brooks nodded slowly. I need to review these documents. We'll reconvene in 5 minutes. When court resumed, the atmosphere had shifted. Judge Brooks returned to the bench, her usual briskness replaced by a quieter demeanor. The spectators, many of whom had remained standing during the recess, watched her closely. Please be seated, she instructed, waiting as they complied. Her gaze settled on David. Sergeant Keane, Mr. Keane, she corrected herself. This court owes you an apology. A murmur of surprise spread through the room. In my effort to maintain the dignity of this court, I failed to recognize that dignity is a two-way street. The court must show the respect it demands. She paused, organizing her thoughts. The contempt charges are dismissed. Furthermore, I am issuing an order that all future proceedings involving you will accommodate your disability, including virtual appearances when necessary. David nodded, his expression solemn. Thank you, Your Honor. I'm not finished. Judge Brooks continued. I am also ordering a review of this courthouse's accessibility compliance to be completed within 30 days, and I will personally oversee revisions to our procedures to ensure incidents like today do not happen. Again, David raised his hand slightly. Your Honor, if I may? She nodded. I don't want special treatment, he said. I never have. What I want, what all veterans want, is the chance to participate fully in the society we fought for. That sometimes requires understanding, not exemption. Judge Brooks held his gaze. The court recognizes your point, Mr. Keane, and I thank you for your service. Her gavel fell softly, and the session adjourned. The events in courtroom 7 could have faded into obscurity, a quiet moment of justice. Corrected. But as David wheeled himself out of the courthouse, he was met by a small group of reporters. Sergeant Keane, can you comment on what happened today? One asked. Marcus moved to intervene, but David stopped him. It's okay. He faced the reporters. Today wasn't about me. It was about ensuring justice is accessible to everyone, no matter their limitations. His words struck a chord. By evening, local news outlets were covering the story. By morning, it had gone national, framed as a powerful reckoning with how America treats its veterans and disabled citizens. Letters and emails poured in from across the country. Veterans sharing similar struggles, disability advocates inviting David to speak, and a law firm offering to represent him in a class action lawsuit to address courthouse accessibility nationwide. Overwhelmed, David confided in Marcus over coffee a week later. I'm just a physics teacher who served his country. I never wanted to be a symbol. Sometimes the fight chooses you, Marcus replied. David declined the lawsuit but agreed to testify before the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. With Colonel Ramirez's guidance, he prepared his testimony, focusing not on legalities but on human dignity. The night before the hearing, Judge Brooks paid him an unexpected visit. Dressed in civilian clothes, she seemed less imposing, more human. I'm not here officially, she said, sitting in his modest apartment. I've been following your case's impact. I understand you're testifying tomorrow. David nodded, surprised. Lena hesitated, then shared a personal story. My father came home from Vietnam with PTSD, though it wasn't called that then. He refused help, saw it as weakness. He drank himself to death when I was in law school. Her voice broke. When I saw you in that wheelchair, I think I saw what he feared becoming. I was wrong, not just legally, but morally. She handed him a folder. These are the new accessibility guidelines for my courtroom. Your moment is creating change. Thank you for telling me about your father, David said sincerely. The next day, in a packed Senate hearing room, David faced a panel of senators. He set aside his prepared statement and spoke from the heart. 2 weeks ago, I couldn't stand in a courtroom when ordered to, but something remarkable happened. Others stood for me. He described his fall, the crowd's support, and the broader issue of accessibility. This wheelchair isn't just how I move. It's a reminder that society often mistakes accommodation for privilege. I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for dignity, the chance to participate fully in the society I fought for. As he concluded, Senator Morrison stood, followed by the entire committee and audience. In the back, Judge Brooks stood, tears streaming down her face. The image of David in his wheelchair before a standing room became iconic, sparking the Veterans Accessibility and Dignity Act, which mandated accessibility improvements in federal buildings. Judge Brooks became an advocate, leading judicial training on disability accommodations. David was appointed to a new VA office to improve veteran access to services. On Memorial Day, David spoke at Arlington National Cemetery, honoring the fallen and advocating for the living. At a headstone for his fallen captain, he whispered, "We're making progress, sir." Frank Morales, the Korean War veteran, joined him, and together they walked among the graves, joined by other veterans, a silent testament to solidarity. A year later, David returned to a renovated courtroom 7 for its rededication. The judge's bench was lowered, and an empty wheelchair stood beside it. A reminder, Judge Brooks said, that justice sees beyond physical limitations. That evening, David read a message from a young soldier at Walter Reed, struggling as a new amputee. David replied, "The hardest part isn't what you've lost. It's remembering what you still have to give. You don't need to stand for something. And when you can't, others will stand with you. That's humanity at its strongest." As he looked at the iconic photo from the Senate hearing, David realized it wasn't about him. It was about a truth born from vulnerability. True strength lies not in standing alone, but in standing together for what matters. In that, he found peace, redefining what it means to stand in a world that often overlooks those who cannot.